Of the mission, the Americans were alone. German fighters attacked at will. As the formation headed for home, RAF Spitfires were sent to meet them over Holland. The returning force was always smaller than the one which had departed, but the tattered survivors held their formation.
Well, I think it was a very inspiring sight, to me anyway, when you could see the formation didn't look anything like the immaculate formation which had set out 4 or 5 hours previously. And there were great holes in it and stragglers and engine smoking, which the Germans always set upon the stragglers and so on. But they came on and kept their formation.
In June 1944, British and American fighters cleared the skies over Normandy. The liberation of France had begun. The British assault was concentrated on the eastern flank of Normandy. The Americans landed to the west. In the days to follow, German defenses were rolled back. Airfields were secured, and soon British fighters were ready to land in France. By 1944, British ace Johnny Johnson had been promoted to the rank of group captain. He now commanded a wing of Canadian fighter pilots. On June the 10th, Johnson and his men made history by becoming the first Allied pilots to land in France. 2 days later, Winston Churchill became the first Allied leader to set foot in Normandy. Brandishing a cigar, the triumphant Prime Minister met with his forces.
Winston Churchill came to see us in Normandy. He came and shook hands with us, and we had got some good Martel brandy, which we'd been given to us by the French. And I said to the Prime Minister, we have some good Martel brandy, so I said, can we put a case in your airplane to take back to England? And he said, despite, he said, all the rigors and tribulations of the war, he said, I've never been short of a drop of brandy, so he said, you keep it in for yourselves.
Allied pilots celebrated their successful return to Europe. But war was far from over. German pilots were desperately trying to drive Allied fighters from France. Johnny Johnson and his Canadian pilots met the Luftwaffe in savage air battles over Normandy. But German fighter pilots lacked the discipline of the men who had fought over Britain. During one engagement, Johnson's team downed 7 Germans without losing a single Spitfire. After the fight, RAF Commander Harry Broadhurst visited the airfield with British Army General Bernard Montgomery. Broadhurst instructed Johnson to tell the general about his success.
So Montgomery said to me, he was a little man, of course, very intense little man. He said, what have you done? I said, well, we got in a fight with a bunch of 109s, and I said, we shot 7 of them down, sir. And he said, I wish you'd have told me you'd have shot down 7 Tiger tanks, because he said, that's my headache at the moment.
Montgomery was right. Tank killers were needed more than fighters. For this, the RAF turned to the deadly Hawker Typhoon. RAF officers rode in specially equipped tanks. When the Allies were met by German armor, the ground controller called in his attackers. Typhoon pilots waited 2,000 feet above the battlefield. When they received the call, the formation swept down upon the enemy. The Typhoon's main weapon was rockets. During a typical attack, the pilots would dive in pairs towards the front of a German tank column. At about 400 yards, the first pair would fire its rockets into the advancing German tanks. Another pair would attack the tanks at the back of the column. Trapped in the middle, the rest were helpless against the RAF onslaught. British Air Vice Marshal Harry Broadhurst later said that this job was the most dangerous task the Royal Air Force has ever asked anyone to do. But as the Allies rolled into France, it was also the most important. Years since the London Blitz, and Germany was launching a new form of terror against the British people. The V-1 flying bomb first appeared over London on June the 13th, 1944. The pilotless warhead looked and sounded like nothing else in the sky. But Londoners quickly learned the distinctive drone of the V-1's ramjet wasn't nearly as frightening as the silence that followed. When the engine cut out, the bomb fell onto the city below. The V-1s were launched from ramps in northern France. It didn't have the accuracy to destroy specific targets, but that didn't matter. The flying bombs were terror weapons, designed to wreak havoc on civilian populations. The job of catching the V-1s fell largely to pilots flying the speedy new Hawker Tempest. The V-1 flew at speeds up to 400 miles an hour. The Tempest was slightly faster, but if the pilot was caught going in the wrong direction, the flying bomb would get through. The idea was to attack the V-1s from above, using dive speed to close the distance. During the summer, Germany stepped up their barrage. Hundreds of V-1s were getting through. But the RAF was about to unveil a weapon of its own. An RAF flight lieutenant named Frank Whittle had been working to pioneer a new form of propulsion, the gas turbine engine. Whittle's first engine was tested in 1937. 4 years later, it was ready to be put into an aircraft. The first British jet, the Gloucester E-2839, flew on May the 15th, 1941. Whittle's plane was experimental, but the experience it provided paved the way for Britain's first jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor. The Meteor entered service with the RAF in July of 1944, just in time to challenge Germany's flying bombs. German attacks increased steadily throughout the summer, and despite the efforts of the Royal Air Force, the V-1 had claimed the lives of thousands of British civilians. The squadron of Meteors first encountered the flying bombs in August, but thanks to the Allied occupation of France, the attacks ended the following month. Only 13 V-1s were destroyed by the Meteor. The RAF's only jet of the war never faced German fighter pilots. It was kept at home while proven Allied fighters destroyed what was left of Germany's once mighty Luftwaffe. The fighter pilots who had survived the defense of Britain were now flying over German cities. But the jet age had arrived, and the propeller-driven fighters which had guided the RAF to victory would soon be left behind. These aircraft are Tornado F-3s, the RAF's only dedicated fighter. Tornado fighter pilots belong to 11 Group of the RAF. 11 Group's proud history dates to the valiant defense of England's besieged southeast coastline during the Battle of Britain. Much has changed in the last 50 years, but for the fighter pilot, the pursuit of air superiority remains an elusive and enduring challenge. Today, RAF fighter pilots will fly against each other in simulated combat. The tactical weapons exercise is a war game involving several squadrons and a wide variety of aircraft. The first order of battle is to engage a group of opposing fighters over an RAF weapons range in the West Highlands.